I'm 41, living in Charleston, West Virginia, working a decent middle management job at the power company. Nothing fancy, but it keeps the lights on, literally and figuratively. After my wife, Jenna, passed 3 years ago, it's been just me and my two kids, Grace, who's 12, and Noah, who's 8. We're managing, holding it together, even though sometimes it feels like I'm trying to glue a shattered plate with chewing gum. A year ago, I met Laura. She seemed perfect, poised, intelligent, a little sassy in the way that made me feel like I wasn't just some tired widower trudging through life. The kids like her at first, too. She'd bring them little gifts, help Grace with her homework, laugh at Noah's endless dinosaur trivia. I thought maybe, just maybe, this could work. But the cracks started to show after about 6 months. Laura started talking about wanting a quieter life, less chaos, fewer distractions. She never said it outright at first, but I could read between the lines. She didn't want the kids. She wanted me, just me. And for a while, I pretended not to see it. Maybe I was scared of being alone again. Maybe I thought love was supposed to be complicated. But when she started hinting that Grace and Noah should go to boarding school, for their benefit, to focus on their education, I felt my stomach drop. Still, I bit my tongue. I wanted to believe we could work it out. But then the real tipping point came. One Saturday morning, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, sipping her green smoothie, and told me flat out, if I didn't send the kids away, the wedding was off. And she wasn't bluffing. Said she was done pretending to be okay with my baggage. The thing is, I'd already started having doubts about Laura. A few days before that ultimatum, I found out she'd been quietly asking her brother, who'd been staying with us rent-free for months, to move out. At my expense. She was trying to clear the house of anyone but herself, building her version of a perfect life, one where my kids weren't part of the picture. That morning, as she sat there waiting for my answer, I realized I'd been blind. And the worst part was, I wasn't even surprised. I just felt tired. Tired of trying to build a future with someone who saw my family as a hurdle. I looked at her perfect hair and her perfect little smoothie, and I said no. No wedding. No more pretending. She packed her things that afternoon, her world crumbling faster than she could sip that drink. And my kids, they stayed with me where they belong. It wasn't a heroic decision. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just the only choice I had left. The days after Laura left felt like the aftermath of a storm. I'd sit in the living room, sipping coffee that tasted like ash, staring at the front door as if she might come back and apologize, even though I knew she wouldn't. Grace and Noah didn't ask about her. They didn't have to. Kids are sharp that way. They knew she was gone because she wanted them gone. But still, the silence between us was heavier than any explanation I could offer. I caught myself standing at the window one night, watching the streetlights blur in the rain, and I thought about how stupid I'd been. How I let someone waltz into our lives, rearrange everything, and almost convince me to send my children away, just keep her. I thought about how easily I let her shape the idea of what a normal family looked like, one where my own kids were a problem to solve rather than a part of the solution. It wasn't just Laura's ultimatum that stung. It was realizing how quietly, almost imperceptibly, I'd started to believe her version of the world. The one where I was too soft on my kids, where Grace and Noah were holding me back from something better. I'd started making excuses for her behavior, telling myself she was just stressed or tired or worried about money, when really, she was just showing me who she was. And then came the text from her brother. He wasn't subtle about it either. "Guess you're back to being single," he sent, followed by a smirking emoji. I stared at the screen, the anger blooming low in my gut like a bruise that wasn't ready to show its colors. I almost typed something back, something scathing, something that would make me feel like I'd won. But I stopped myself. Because winning what? A fight with a man who'd spent 6 months sponging off me and my kids? A man who'd grinned as Laura packed her bags and walked out the door? No, I wasn't going to waste my breath on him. Instead, I blocked his number, deleted the thread, and turned off my phone for the night. But the next morning, I woke up to an email. From Laura. Short, sharp, and laced with passive aggression. "I'm sorry things didn't work out," it read, "but you'll understand that I need the ring back. I think it's only fair." Fair. That word echoed in my head as I sat there, staring at the screen. Fair. As if she'd been fair. As if any of this was fair. I thought about the hours she'd spent planning our wedding, picking out flowers, choosing a venue, talking about colors, and how none of it had included Grace or Noah. I thought about the weekend she'd gone out to clear her head, while I stayed home playing board games with the kids and pretending everything was fine. I replied with 2 words, "Come get it." No explanation, no anger. Just a simple invitation. Let her face what she'd thrown away. I'll admit, I expected her to show up the next day, maybe with that brittle smile she used when she was trying to charm her way through something uncomfortable. But she didn't come. Days turned into a week, and the ring sat there on a nightstand like a reminder of just how much time I'd wasted trying to build a future with her. During those days, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Little details, like how quiet the house felt. Not an empty quiet, but a peaceful one. Grace started leaving her door open again at night. Noah spent more time in the living room instead of hiding in his room playing video games. It was as if they could finally breathe, like a weight they'd been carrying without knowing it had lifted. One evening, Grace brought me a drawing she'd done, a simple picture of our family, just the three of us standing in front of our old house. There was no Laura in the picture, just us. I asked her about it, and she just shrugged, saying it felt right that way. I felt a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I told her it was beautiful, and I meant it. I guess that's when it really hit me. I've been so focused on trying to make things work with Laura that I hadn't noticed how much of myself I'd lost in the process. How I'd started compromising not just my time or money, but my kids' sense of security. I was supposed to be the rock, the one holding us together, and instead, I've been giving away pieces of our lives to someone who didn't deserve them. A few days later, I got a message from a mutual friend. Laura had moved in with someone else, some lawyer she'd been seeing behind my back, apparently for months. The friend said she thought I should know, like it was supposed to be some kind of revelation. But honestly, I wasn't surprised. In a way, it almost felt like a relief. Like it confirmed what I'd already known in my gut. Laura was never going to choose us. Not really. The ring stayed on the nightstand for a while longer, catching the light from the window each morning. And one day, without even thinking about it, I picked it up and dropped it into the kitchen junk drawer next to old batteries and broken pens. That's where it belonged. A forgotten relic from a chapter 1 was finally ready to close. I think what surprised me most was how quiet the house stayed afterward. Not the tense, brittle quiet of waiting for a fight or walking on eggshells, but a calm, steady silence like the air finally decided to stop humming with anxiety. Grace and Noah adjusted quicker than I expected. Grace started helping out more around the house without being asked, and Noah, who used to retreat into himself whenever things got tense, started showing me his drawings again. Little things, but they told me everything I needed to know. I won't lie. There were moments when the emptiness caught me off guard. I'd reach for the extra coffee mug in the morning, or I'd glance at the couch expecting to see Laura scrolling through her phone with that look of detached boredom she always wore when we were together. And for a split second, I'd feel a pang of regret, not for losing her, but for the time I wasted trying to keep her in my life. But then I'd hear Grace laughing in the other room, or Noah would ask me if we could go for a walk, and I'd remember that whatever sadness I felt wasn't about missing Laura. It was about missing the illusion I'd built of what I thought we could be. A couple of weeks after everything, I got an invitation in the mail. It was from Laura's brother, the same one who'd lived with us, mooching off our kindness. He was getting married. The nerve. I almost laughed when I opened it, the gold embossed card practically daring me to show up and pretend we were all still family. I tossed it straight into the trash. But the twist came the next morning when Grace found it in the trash and asked why I'd thrown it away. I hesitated for a second, then told her the truth. I said, because sometimes even family doesn't deserve a second chance. She nodded like she understood more than a 12-year-old should, and I realized I wasn't just teaching her about boundaries. I was showing her what self-respect looks like. After that morning, something shifted in me. Not in some dramatic, life-altering way, but like a heavy coat finally slipped off my shoulders. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming. I stopped rehearsing imaginary arguments with Laura in my head. I even stopped wondering what she was telling people about me because in the end, it didn't matter. Work was the same grind it always was. I'd get up early, make breakfast for the kids, drop them at school, and then head into the office where the fluorescent lights hummed and the smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. But I noticed I was starting to smile more, even if it was just to myself. I catch a glimpse of Grace concentrating on her homework at the kitchen table, or Noah telling a story with his whole body, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something like peace. I even started sleeping better. Not the restless, heavy sleep of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts, but real sleep, the kind where you wake up and realize the world didn't fall apart while you were unconscious. Then came a knock on the door. Late afternoon, just after I'd gotten home from work. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there stood Laura. She looked different. Her hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, her makeup a little heavier than usual, and her expression somewhere between embarrassed and defiant. She didn't say anything right away, just stood there, arms crossed, as if waiting for me to invite her in. I didn't. I stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, and waited. Finally, she muttered something about wanting to talk things over, that she missed me, that she'd made a mistake, that we could try again. And for a split second, the old reflex kicked in. The part of me that wanted to keep the peace, to fix things, to make it all better. But then I caught Grace's reflection in the hallway mirror, her eyes watching from around the corner, and I knew that letting Laura back in wouldn't fix anything. It would just teach my kids that love was conditional, that family could be erased for convenience and brought back for comfort. So I stepped back, shook my head slowly, and told her it was over. This time for good. She didn't say anything after that, just stood there, her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to her car. I watched her pull away from the curb, her taillights flickering as she disappeared down the street. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It wasn't a triumphant feeling, not a victory, just a quiet realization that I didn't have to keep proving myself to someone who never intended to love the whole of me. The kids, the mess, the history. I closed the door, leaned against it for a moment, and exhaled the breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. That night, I told Grace and Noah we were going to have a movie marathon. Popcorn, blankets, the whole 9 yards. Grace picked an old animated movie she loved, and Noah chose one of those adventure flicks with way too many explosions. We ended up staying up past midnight, laughing and pretending everything was normal, and for the first time, almost was. In the middle of it all, Grace fell asleep on my shoulder, and Noah was curled up next to me, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. I looked down at them, their faces soft and peaceful in sleep, and I realized something that made my throat tighten. They weren't just my kids. They were my anchor, my reason for pulling myself back from the edge. Laura had seen them as obstacles, but they were my life rafts. Without them, I probably would have given in to the easy escape she offered. But with them, I found the strength to stand my ground. And in that quiet, dimly lit living room, surrounded by blankets and the faint smell of burnt popcorn, I promised myself I would never again let anyone, no matter how charming, no matter how perfect on paper, make me choose between love and family. Because if it comes down to it, love that asks you to give up the people who make you whole isn't love at all. In the weeks that followed, life slowly started to settle into a new rhythm. I wasn't foolish enough to think things would be perfect. There were still mornings when the weight of everything hit me before I even got out of bed. But it was different now. I wasn't waking up dreading the day ahead. I was waking up knowing I could face it. I got into the habit of packing lunches for the kids with little notes tucked inside, silly jokes for Noah, encouraging words for Grace. It was a small thing, but it felt like reclaiming something I'd lost. My role as a parent, fully present and accounted for. I even started making dinner again, real dinners, not just frozen pizza or boxed mac and cheese. Grace tried her hand at baking, and we had a lot of kitchen disasters that ended in flour-covered laughter. Noah decided he wanted to learn how to ride his bike without training wheels, and I spent a Saturday afternoon running up and down the street with him, my legs burning, but my heart light. And then came the twist I didn't see coming. I was in the middle of sorting through some bills one evening when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You should know she's not done with you," it read. I frowned, reading it over again. Then came another. "She's planning something. Be careful." I stared at the screen, a chill creeping down my spine. My first thought was that it was Laura, but this didn't feel like her style. Too cryptic, too indirect. I blocked the number and tried to shake it off, but the words clung to me like burrs. I didn't tell Grace or Noah about it. They didn't need more reasons to worry. But that night, as I locked the front door and double-checked the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe the story wasn't over yet. The next few days felt off. I catch myself checking over my shoulder while walking to the car. I started locking the door the moment we came home, drawing the blinds even when it was still light out. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was just the leftover tension of realizing how fragile everything had been all along. At work, I found myself distracted, double-checking my phone every time it buzzed. No new messages, no unknown numbers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was creeping closer. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, that it was nothing but leftover adrenaline from standing my ground against Laura. But deep down, I knew better. Then, one Friday evening, just as the sun dipped below the trees in the backyard, I heard a car pull up outside. I peered through the blinds, heart already beating faster. A sleek black sedan sat at the curb, its engine idling. The driver didn't get out, just sat there, watching. I told myself it was probably a delivery driver or someone lost, but something in my gut clenched. I stayed by the window, watching, until after what felt like forever, the car finally pulled away. That night, I barely slept. My dreams were twisted versions of reality. Laura's voice on the phone, her brother's smirking face, the black sedan waiting at the end of the street. I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, the early morning light creeping through the blinds like a warning. For the first time since I'd told Laura it was over, I felt fear clawing its way back in. Not just fear for myself, but for Grace and Noah. I couldn't afford to be wrong. Couldn't afford to assume it was all in my head. So I decided, then and there, to take action. I wasn't going to wait for whatever was coming. I was going to meet it head on. The next day, I called an old friend, Rob, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who'd always been the kind of guy you could count on when things got messy. Rob used to work in private security, and though we hadn't stayed close, I knew he'd pick up the phone if I called. I told him what was going on. Not the whole story, just enough for him to understand the unease that had been gnawing at me. He didn't hesitate. Said he'd swing by and take a look around. That afternoon, Rob showed up in his old beat-up truck, wearing a faded flannel and jeans. He looked around the neighborhood, made a few calls, asked me to walk him through the layout of the house and yard. He was quiet, methodical, like he was calculating probabilities I couldn't even see. When we sat down in the kitchen, he said something that made my stomach twist. Whoever was in that car wasn't just passing through. They were casing the place, watching for patterns. It wasn't random. I felt my mouth go dry. He went on, telling me it was probably time to install cameras if I hadn't already, to change locks, maybe even stay somewhere else for a while. I thought about Grace and Noah, about how I just started to feel like we were finding a new normal. And now this. Another storm I hadn't seen coming. That night, I didn't tell the kids what was going on. I couldn't. They deserved one last quiet evening before I turned our lives upside down again. We made spaghetti, watched another movie, and I tried to pretend I wasn't jumping at every shadow crossing the window. But when I finally went to bed, I lay awake for hours, listening to every creak, every gust of wind, every distant car passing by. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know when. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the kids' untouched cereal bowls. The weight of it all pressed down on me. The creeping threat, the unfamiliar fear, the exhaustion of having to hold everything together. I was halfway through debating whether to call in sick from work when there was another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't Laura. It was a man I didn't recognize, mid-30s, expensive suit, too smooth smile. He introduced himself as a friend of Laura's, said he was just stopping by to pick up something she'd left behind. Something about the way he lingered on the word friend made my stomach twist. I kept the door barely cracked and told him there was nothing here for Laura anymore. He gave me a look that wasn't quite threatening, but wasn't friendly either, like a cat playing with a mouse it wasn't sure it wanted to kill just yet. Before he left, he said something that still echoes in my mind. She's not done, you know? She doesn't like to lose. After he was gone, I locked every door and window in the house. Called Rob. He said he'd come back by that evening, check for anything unusual. Told me to keep my phone close. I spent the rest of the day alternating between trying to stay calm for Grace and Noah and pacing the living room, wondering just how far Laura was willing to go. That night, after Rob came by and checked the place over, he handed me something I hadn't expected, a small, discreetly boxed device. GPS tracker, he said, just in case she tries to pull something sneaky. Hide it in your car. Better to be prepared. I tucked it into my glove box, heart racing. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just trying to protect my kids from a broken relationship anymore. I was trying to protect us from whatever Laura thought she was entitled to. And I was ready to fight if I had to. The final piece fell into place 2 days later. I was picking the kids up from school when I noticed a car parked down the street, engine idling, the same black sedan from before. But this time, something was different. The driver wasn't watching me. He was on his phone, probably thinking he was invisible. I parked, got out of the car, and walked the kids inside like everything was normal. But my mind was racing. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I'd installed the tracker Rob gave me, double-checked the locks, and even started setting the alarm system every night. I was doing everything I could to keep my family safe. But what finally made me pick up the phone and call the police wasn't fear. It was anger. Anger at myself for ever letting someone like Laura so far into our lives. Anger at her for thinking she could still reach into our world and twist it for her own purposes. Anger that this nightmare wasn't ending. The officer who came to the house was polite but skeptical. Said it was probably nothing, an ex with bruised pride, a harmless observer. But he promised to make a report and drive by more often. It wasn't much, but it was something. After the kids went to bed, I sat in the living room in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a train. I wasn't naive. I knew Laura's game wasn't about love or regret. It was about control, about making sure I remembered that she could still get under my skin. But here's the thing she didn't count on. I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't the man who tried to fix things that were already broken. I wasn't the man who put everyone else's needs before his own. And I sure as hell wasn't the man who'd let his kids live in fear because of someone else's games. I sat there until the house felt still, until the shadows on the walls stopped creeping, and I made myself a quiet promise. No one, not Laura, not her friends, not the ghosts of what we almost were, was going to steal my peace again. My kids deserve better. And so did I.